Alright, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Big Bad Monster. This is going to be a breakdown of Final Fantasy XIII, especially the Fire Lightning variant, how to beat it, the best techs I've found, and some honest opinions on the deck. So let's dig in, shall we? What is Fire Lightning 13? Where did it come from? So if you guys have been following the channel for a while, I have talked a lot about the 13 starter deck. I think I've already been, this is the third video in which I'm going to be going over this starter deck. It's been kind of a fascinating thing to follow, and I did not expect it to take over the metagame the way it did. So I think last set, Fire Ice was probably better. I know in Japan they were playing a lot of Fire Lightning already, but I really don't think that was the best way to play until recently. But what does Fire Lightning 13 do? Well, almost all of the power in the deck is concentrated in this one card, which is Lightning. She's a 2CP haste, and when one or more Category 13 forwards you control attack, all the forwards you control gain 1,000 power until the end of the turn. If 2 or more attack, you draw a card, or have attacked, and if 3 or more have attacked, you do your opponent a point of burn damage. This adds up extremely quickly. It is very easy for this deck to actually get 3 forwards out by its second turn that can all attack, at which point, if they all attack, you have now drawn 2 cards after your draw phase, dealt your opponent 4 points of damage, and you are threatening lethal next turn. It's possible to 2-turn kill in this deck. I will straight up tell you, I think that the 2-turn kill is bad. I think it's the only way you lose with this deck consistently, is to go for the 2-turn kill and get punished. But it's possible, which is annoying and scary. So let's go take a look at a full deck list. This is my version of Fire Lightning 13. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have my cursor on for the display capture. Let me go ahead and turn it on so I can kind of point to what I'm doing. There we go. The only cards that really matter a ton here are Fang, Vanille, Null, Lightning, Hope, Lumina, and Ishtola. The rest of these are pretty flexible, honestly. You probably want some number of Saz, because he's another Category 13 forward. It really feels like if you have your basic core, the rest of it can be just filled with red and purple good stuff. And you're probably fine, as long as it's probably not backups. Let's do the card by card. So I have Gato. Gato lets you play a 2-cost fire forward when he enters the field. And he's a 13 forward. So he lets you play a Fang or a Saz, or the really scary one, which is this Zidane, for free. 3 copies of Fang. Fang is essentially the old Beatrix for Category 13. If you have 3 or more Category 13 characters, notably I used to think this was forwards. The fact it's characters makes a big difference. All the Category 13 forwards you control gain 2,000 power, so she goes to 7,000, Lightning goes to 9,000, Vanille goes to 9,000, Hope goes to a 10k. And once per turn, she can make the next Category 13 character you cast cost 2 less. 2 copies of Vanille. In general, this is just special fodder that happens to be a purple card named Vanille. That said, there are situations where if you don't have Amaterasu and your opponent Shantotos you, you can do something like Phoenix this Vanille in, and then tax the Shantoto if your opponent has no way to pay the extra 2. I think there maybe in some matchups you could consider, like on a bad hand, going Reeve into Vanille and then like getting the Vanille out early and just taxing your wind opponent until you get the combo online. But generally she's just here because she's a purple card that is a special for Vanille, and we need some number of purple cards, and there's not enough good ones for the deck. 2 copies of Saz. This is he's basically another free 2-cost 13 forward. Very similar to Gato in that regard. He searches out his son, Dodge, which we have 1 copy of. You could run this one. I like the EX Burst just because it helps cycle extra lightnings out of your hand if you absolutely have to. And if you do happen to take damage, being able to cycle there is also potentially useful if you're digging for a specific answer. It doesn't matter, though. If you want to turn Saz into a blue worm, that is totally A-okay as well. 2 copies of Zidane. There are very specific cards that your opponents have to draw to deal with this deck. Zidane can potentially say that those counters don't exist. He is awkward to get into play, though. You probably almost would want to like have Gatto or Hope in a Searcher to go like Hope, Gatto, Zidane. And then you'd still be a little bit in a weird place because you don't necessarily have lightning access off of that. But I think even if you get like a 3-turn kill, but you have Zidane hand looping your opponent, you're probably going to win that more often than not. There's definitely situations where your opponent could go like Rydia to get a Hecaton Shear, and then you can Phoenix out Zidane to have an answer to a card you otherwise couldn't answer. He's also just a good way of sneaking lethal. Because he can't be blocked by cost 3 or higher, it's very easy when you get to damage 6 to go Reeve or Phoenix back the Zidane. Rip the answer out of their hand if they possibly have one. Swing, get in for lethal. 3 copies of Null. This card's a lot more dangerous than I think he read when I was first evaluating the cards. He has Haste, which already says a lot because you have 2 forwards in the deck now with Haste. When he attacks, he gets 1,000 power for each Category 13 character you control. That includes himself. It's very easy for him to be your first attacker as a 10, 11, or 12k forward. And when any forward your opponent leaves the field for any reason, you get to dull an opponent's forward. This is actually very useful because a lot of the answer to this deck is just trying to outstat it, because this deck is very battle reliant. And Null can sometimes just say that their answers don't actually work. 3 copies of Lightning. She's the bread and butter of the deck. She's the most powerful card in the deck. She's the card that I don't think should have been printed with the text the way it was. I think if it was anything, maybe they should have made like this, like a one-time use thing where you only get like the effect once per turn and you choose when to fire it. But as the card is printed, she is just miserable to play with and against. Words cannot describe how much I detest this card. 3 copies of Y'shtola. This was the big change that I think put the Fire Lightning variant over the top. So, again, there's been a big issue in the past where none of the Fire Lightning cards are very good. Aldori Emperor is very slow and didn't age all that well. I think Arden is a very powerful card that is lacking a home. This would not be a home for Arden. What were the other Fire Lightning cards? There was the other Null, but this Null is going to overshadow that every single time. And the legend was Ace, right? Which Ace is a archetype locked card, so it doesn't fit this deck. Anima is terrible, and the other Fire Lightning card is Zac, which is a card that is a very nice limited card, but never going to see constructed play. Y'shtola is everything for this deck. She pitches for either element to help you get your color fixes on early, especially considering we're only on 8 backups and only 1 fire backup. It's very common this deck will get to 6 damage and have to close out. Y'shtola basically says, have instant speed removal or I win the game here. She's also a removal engine. She can pop an 8k that's sitting there as an annoying blocker. She's just good. She helps round up your damage in places. This is probably the strongest shell for the card, period. 3 copies of Vanille. Vanille and Hope provide a very strong loop where they can search each other, and the last one searches out Lightning, so you have Vanille and Hope on field, protect a Lightning in hand where she's relatively safe. Vanille also has a very powerful special. Doubles the damage your opponent's forwards take next turn, and then deals them 2,000 damage, which then is doubled to 4k. If you ever pull off a double Imperilga, that is essentially a free board wipe. If you have Imperilga and then Squall, that's also just a board wipe. 2 copies of Squall. I've noticed this deck can have issues clearing opponents' fields. Squall is both a forward that your opponent doesn't want to block, and if they can't block, they're taking a ton of damage. But also, he's just a big threat on his own, especially when you factor in the synergy with Vanille. 3 copies of Hope. Hope is... You could get rid of every line of text other than the search a category 13 forward, and Hope would basically play the same. The 5 characters does not come up very often, and it's such a small boost, who cares? And if you're using Hope to shrink it forward, I imagine you've already won that game. Sid Reigns, it's just another 13 name that happens to break a small guy. I really don't want to play this unless it's off of a Fang, because you don't have a lot of backups. It's hard to build your hand size back up in this deck sometimes. So it can be hard to actually play the Sid Reigns, but we need some quantity of purple cards, and Sid Reigns is the best purple card that's also category 13 to kind of fill this slot. As for the summons, I've actually played as many as 18 summons to facilitate Seymour in the deck as like a better Sid Reigns, but this list is just on 3 Belias the Gigas, 3 Amaterasu, 3 Phoenix, and 3 Bahamut. Every one of these summons, when they come up, just wins you the game. Amaterasu basically says no board wipes. Belias says, I'm doing you lethal out of nowhere. It turns every one of your cards into essentially lightning, in a way. It's also an EX burst that draws you a card. It's never anything bad. Phoenix allows you to pull back your lightnings, your Zidanes. So many powerful cards. You will sneak lethal out of nowhere with Phoenix so many times, and your opponent just can't see it coming. And the Bahamut is honestly unfair. The fact that this pings for 10k RFG just cleans up so many cards that this deck shouldn't be able to handle. I'm on 2 copies of Spectral Keeper. This is just to try to shore up a bad matchup in that this deck can't deal with the 4-color Warrior of Light outside of exactly Bahamut. Spectral Keeper allows you to kind of just continuously dull it so you don't have to worry about it. A lot of the counterplay to this deck is just trying to outstat it. Spectral Keeper says that counterplay no longer works. You have to go for a board wipe. And for that reason, I think it's actually pretty obnoxious to have in the list. The backups, 1 copy of Dodge is a Saz Searcher. Also gives him First Strike, which is relevant. Lightning can make him pretty big before he attacks. 3 copies of Lumina. This is the next best thing to open if you don't open Vanille or Hope. 3 copies of Reeve. This allows you to have copies 5, 6, or 4, 5, and 6 of Lightning. And then 1 copy of Aldo. Aldo is essentially kind of another Lumina, just not quite as good. So what's the game plan? You're going to hard mulligan for Hope or Vanille. If you don't have them, just take the mulligan. You can get an okay start with like an Aldo or a Lumina, but in general, you're just going to always want to see them. You're going to cascade them into each other, keep the lightning in hand, and pass. So this is a representation of the board. You'll be 8 cards into your deck. You'll have a lightning and a Vanille, and a Hope on field, and a lightning, and then 1 other random card in hand. Turn 2. You play the lightning by discarding a card. You'll swing all 3 of them. They should all be dull. You'll deal 4 points of damage, and you'll end with 4 cards in hand. If you happen to draw Amaterasu, or even like a Phoenix, you're in such a powerful position at that point that you've probably just won the game. Even if your opponent Shantotos you at this point, you don't have the Amaterasu. You're on 6 in hand, your opponent just dumped their hand for a Shantoto. I think this is the safest way to play, and I think it wins so many games by just doing it. And it's very simple. And it's extremely consistent. If you hard mulligan, you're seeing the top 11 cards in your deck. You have 6 copies of Hope from Vanille. That gives you an 80% chance to open them. And there are other opens that do similar things as well. Like you can open Fang plus Null plus Lightning would do it. Like one of my favorite things to do is just go Fang into Hope or Vanille. You actually keep an extra card in hand, and you have the Fang able to attack next turn while threatening the power boost as soon as you go to combat. And it's still just as difficult to deal with. One thing about this board that's also hard to deal with is that these are actually properly statted forwards, despite the fact that they're essentially 2 CP each. There are 2 CP 7k and a 2 CP 8k. It's one of the rules of Final Fantasy TCG is that removal of a forward tends to cost as much as playing that forward does. Killing a 4 CP 8k tends to cost about 4 CP if you're paying for just the removal. Which means that actually like answering these boards is very difficult. You have 2 very large bodies that don't want to die. The lightning is the one you need to kill, but you can't kill her until your opponent's attack phase. And if you don't deal with it, you take so much damage that you probably just lose the game. Other strengths, Fang, again, is just ludicrously good. She allows them to avoid every board wipe. just about, except for Hecaton Shear. Bahamut is such a nasty catch-all. It's so easy to go, even starting on turn 2, you have 2 cards in hand, so you can play Lightning, have your 3 forwards, Bahamut a problem forward out of the way, and then go to combat and just win. Ishtola lets you sneak lethal out of nowhere. Phoenix is another way of getting lethal. Reeve, Amaterasu basically says a lot of your opponent's answers don't work very well. It's just a nasty, nasty deck to play against. So how do you beat it? Well, I have spent so much time trying to beat this deck, and nothing is that consistent. Generally, what I have tried to do is when you see this board, you want to remove hope as quickly as you can. If you can play a forward that kills the hope, you're giving yourself a chance. They're still going to rebuild very quickly, and they're still going to threaten you. But if you have a big forward that kills the hope, it's very hard for the Lightning and the Vanille to swing over it, and you have a chance at that point. The problem is that, like, if your opponent actually windmill slammed the Lightning down, they'd have no cards in hand, and you could board wipe them, and they'd have 0 cards in hand. You'd be on 1 point of damage. You would just win the game. If they play it conservatively, you don't have that. Best answer, Hecaton Shear. Whenever you have the Hecaton Shear, if you see just the 2 forwards, honestly, it's almost worth just killing it. You're paying as much as they are, unfortunately, but you're saving yourself 4 points of damage and 2 draws for your opponent. Just do it. It's going to hurt a little bit. Your hand size is going to be worse. If you're on an Earth deck, just slap in 2 or 3 copies of Hecaton Shear. I promise you it will save you in this matchup. A lot of Earth's other answers are awkward. Titan, if your opponent has a Fang down, does not answer the board. Shadow Lord misses quite a few random forwards. Thankfully, it does get the 3 big ones, but you do take a point of damage when you do that. And again, if you're answering at that point, you've already taken 4, so taking that 5th point of damage might just be too much. And if you're running Kefka as your answer, Kefka is a 9k Brave, which is fantastic at answering it. They don't have 3 forwards until they've already dealt you 4 points of damage and drawn 2. And Kefka, if he gets RFG'd by a Bahamut, doesn't get the summon cast. The other best answer, other than Hecaton Shear, and to a lesser extent Shantoto, is Cecil, Warrior of Light. Because the deck, if you look at my build, it's on so few backups, paying the tax on Cecil isn't really a viable option. And Warrior of Light is a haste first strike brave 10k. There are very few cards the deck has that deals with this. It really gives you time, like it buys you time to deal with whatever you need to build up. Just extremely powerful combination. I think it's borderline meta-defining right now because of how cleanly it answers what 13 is trying to do. To the point where I think 13 should probably start teching back. That's why I actually added the Spectral Keepers, was just to deal with this combination. I really like Retainers as an answer. Retainers get to do the exact same thing back to Fire Lightning 13. You get to go Noctis Gladio. Gladio, punch away the Hope. And Gladio is funny because Gladio can never lose or never go down without taking Lightning with him. It is extremely hard to get Lightning to be a 12k. And Gladio always hits as a 12k. The only time would be if you have to worry about a Bolias, for instance. But having a 10k Brave that hits back as 12k is shockingly good in the matchup. I would not be surprised if there was some way to play like Retainers with Soiree that actually did very well and had a ludicrously good win rate against Fire Lightning 13, because Soiree is already being a pretty common answer thanks to Cecil, Warrior of Light. I think Cecil into Noctis into Gladio would have very similar success. Let's go over the other elements. We've kind of talked about Earth a lot. Earth just has a lot of natural answers. I think in Lightning, most people gravitate towards XIII. I will straight up tell you XIII is not perfect. In fact, I think the first XIII very rarely does it. What does do it is Man in Black XIII. If you get Man in Black and you suspend an XIII, you have won that game. Getting to Man in Black XIII, actually very difficult. I have seen, when Fire Lightning 13 was really going rampant, we were trying to play test everything into it. We were doing so many stupid things. And we have tried XE in both kicking it and non-kicking it. And the deck that was running just that with very few other answers still lost probably 80% of the time to the Fire Lightning 13 deck. You really need more hate than just Ixion. Do not think Ixion is enough to win the matchup by itself. You need to be able to repeatedly cast the Ixion, and you need it to be cheap enough where you feel okay doing it. So Man in Black plus Ixion is really what you're looking for. Small note on Ixion, by the way, because I didn't know this until recently. If you're casting Ixion and you want to kick it, if you pitch a lightning card from hand to pay for Ixion, and then tap 3 backups, that will still do it. It's not, you don't pay it in 2 separate pockets because you're paying the cost. As long as 2 of your CP are lightning, which happens by discarding a lightning card naturally, you will still get the kicker. It's very important if they start to get to a wider board and you want to kill a Vanille as well or something. So yeah, little rulings tidbit that I didn't know until recently. You don't have to have a 2 lightning backups to dull. Just a lightning card from hand, and then any other way to get the last 3 CP will work. The other one is really good is actually Kuja. Kuja's a really nice EX burst. If you pack your deck with this and you hit it on the first swing, you kill the lightning, you cut them off the 2 draws and the extra point of damage, which usually puts them down in a fun hand size that you have time to recover. There's not a lot of decks. If just having 2 CP forwards on the field was enough to win games, you would see decks do it more often. It really is the lightning accelerant that makes this deck go so much faster. Kuja is just such a good EX burst for dealing with lightning that if you're in lightning, just slap a copy or 2 of Kuja in there. He will pay for himself, I promise. The action ability also is very good too. You get to stop 1 attack, which stops a draw or a point of damage. Wind has only one viable answer. I have tried literally everything else trying to make this work. I've done Izana Chocobo loops. I've done... I've seen the Yuna tried. Yuna doesn't do it. Barlai is too slow. You have to play Yuffie right now if you're in Wind. You can maybe sneak through an Ice Wind if you can just consistently chain 3 casts. But even there, you have to draw so well, and your opponent has to just sit there and take it. Yuffie is, bar none, one of the strongest answers to the deck. But you have to make room for about the 6 copies you're going to need to run. You got to run the 3 Yuffie, 2 of the 1-drop Yuffie, and then a copy of Mina is the smallest engine that I would be comfortable with. And you also cannot get greedy with your Yuffie unless you think you need to win. Do not get greedy with your Yuffie. When your opponent goes for the board, they're only having 2 cards in hand, one of which is a light card. You know there's no interaction they have access to. So your first turn, you're safe to swing the Yuffie. Yuffie will reactivate. You'll go to your opponent's turn. You'll draw your 2. If you have Doom of the Living, just fire it. Do not wait, because if you wait, especially if they go to 3 forwards, if they play the lightning down and pass, they are going to Bahamut you on the stack of your reactivation. Do not let them do that, because you will lose the game on the spot. You have to Doom of the Living as soon as you have access to it, even if it means Yuffie is dull and targetable for a turn. It sucks. It's annoying. It's the only way you lose when Yuffie's on the field, if you have access to the special, is to let them Amaterasu, Bahamut. There's so many answers to it that even something like Double Belias would do it, right? If you don't have the special. Do not get greedy with your Yuffie attacks unless you have to. She is not safe enough in the matchup to go for that. Fire has a bit of luck in that it has a lot of very good instant speed removal. Braska's ability to just kill lightning on your opponent's turn means that he becomes a threat they have to answer. I think the big problem with Fire is it's just not in a great position right now. I think the Tidus from last set, if you're on Mono Fire, actually does very well. You can just nuke away a Hope while putting an 8k on the field yourself. Ace is very good. Just really try to hold as much removal for your opponent's turn as possible. Don't pitch summons that you don't have to. Amaterasu on Lightning's first swing is very good as well. Water, you have two really good answers. First one is Leviathan 6. Generally, I would say to add a forward back to your hand if you can. I would put the Lightning on the bottom of the deck and add a forward back. Bouncing a forward generally means they're going to be able to replay it in main phase 2. So take your 2 points of damage, trust that the Lightning is gone, and use that to stabilize. Also, your own Lightning is very, very good. They're almost always going to be ahead of you on board presence. Lightning allows you to just remove whatever the scariest one is, while also giving you a nice little blocker. And Switch Command is also really useful too. They can go in, you can block a point of damage, switch Kamada, have her come back in, and remove the most threatening card. Ice has a couple. It's a little bit awkward. If you go first, and you know what your opponent's on, if you have access to Sarah Mobius, I would actually even use Yale for Sarah Mobius. Sarah Mobius has the ability to just turn off 2 attackers every turn, and she's very hard for the deck to kill. Very hard for the deck to kill. The dull 2 forwards is just that useful. It's kind of like having a perpetual dull freeze on 2 forwards. The other option is you have to start dulling and freezing forwards starting from turn 1. Narrow Weiss to lock down the Hope is a thing that you can do to get there. If you're on a deck with a lot of summons, consider teching a Terra or 2. Terra with 2 summons on turn 1 can dull freeze both forwards. That'll do it. It's actually funny because I thought the card was dreadful, but the 3-drop unit from last set actually I think is not a bad card for the matchup. If you're just struggling horribly with it, they get to keep 1 forward, but everything else can't attack the next turn. And the special is actually quite well costed for Ice. Essentially being 4 CP plus dulling Terra, or sorry, not dulling Terra, dulling Yuna to kill 2. It's kind of like Doom of the Living at home. But yeah, generally you need to be dull freezing as much as possible. And if you can get a big forward out as a blocker as well, that's always appreciated too. But these are kind of the easiest, small tech engines, I would say, that could do it. Weiss is if you're running a lot of other discard. Sarah is just a way of getting there as long as you know the matchup and can get to her easily. And then anything like Terra, where you can just consistently dull or freeze opponents' forwards, is a way of handling it. For Light or Dark, these are kind of the best anti-13 Light or Dark forwards that I have found. I'm sure there might be other ones out there. Tidus, you have a great EX burst. You can kind of use this in response to your opponent's Hope Vanille, remove the Hope. They then crash in one of their forwards with the Tidus. You take the crash, kill one of theirs, and then hope that you're going to outscale them and they don't rebuild quickly enough. Neo X Death, because the deck doesn't really have a lot of fairly costed removal, Neo X Death can sometimes just win the game on the spot if your opponent gets a little greedy. That said, if they get the Bahamut down on the next turn, you have lost the game. And then the Emperor, I think, is one that's a little slept on. But I think if your opponent does that, the Emperor can dig for other answers in your color, because he draws you 2 cards on entry effectively. And he's also a 9k that doesn't take damage twice. There's not a lot of small ping in 13. So he'll hang around. They can't swing in casually to a 9k Brave. And he's just going to sit there like a big turd and stop them from dealing you damage. I think he's a little slept on at the moment. I think this card is... It's dangerous, right? As soon as you draw 1, you probably need to slam it down, even if it's turn 1. He'd be a 2 CP 9k that draws you 2 cards and cycles out of your hand. But the moment you start drawing extra copies of him, or if he's vulnerable to getting bounced, if you have a bad water matchup already. Like the Emperor is just going to make it even worse because like bouncing this guy is so bad. But yeah, I would say that if you have the ability to play like 2 of this Emperor and like 1 of the Warp Emperor or something, like maybe that's what I would go for, or like 1 of this and 2 of the Warp Emperor. That way, like your Garnets aren't as bad, but it's just a little tricky because you can only really play him 1 time and get the draw effect off of him. But usually that should be enough to stabilize. Closing thoughts. I think this is maybe my least favorite deck in the metagame since I've started playing. I think Stern Chocobos was maybe more Stern Chocobos was more powerful, but at least like Stern Chocobos was kind of like funny. Like there was a certain comedy factor of your opponent playing like 4 Chocobos and drawing 10 cards on your first turn. That just isn't present with this deck. This deck is just like, it feels like dumb aggro for the sake of being dumb aggro, and that's just kind of annoying. Unlike Stern Chocobos as well, it has access to Amaterasu, which I really don't like. Amaterasu has a bit of Solemn Judgment problem for me right now, where it's like one of the most dangerous things with Solemn Judgment is when a combo deck can actually run it as well, like going first, because then if you have an answer to their board, they can Judgment it, and then all of a sudden you need 2 answers to the board, and usually you can't get to 2 answers against 13. You don't have time. It's very consistent. It's easy to pilot. I think there's a non-zero chance this does well at the Florida Materia Cup, just given those facts. Traditionally, Florida tends to really have aggro do well at their events. It's the start of a new meta. People still don't know what actually answers this deck very well. I will straight up tell you that in my testing, this deck wins, even in what I thought would do, like even in matchups that I thought had very strong counter cards, you still lose a lot to it. It's extremely linear. It's very telegraphed. If you know what your opponent has in their hand based on what they're doing, you can make educated guesses on what is safe to go for and what isn't safe. The downside is that even though it's linear, it's still powerful enough and so fast that most decks don't have time to get to their win con before they're already dead against it. And this is a personal thing. And I could talk about this more in another video as well. I come from Yu-Gi-Oh! Where ban lists are a lot more common. I really would like to see Lightning limited, just to rein in this deck a little bit. I think this is one of the least interesting, least fun decks in the history of the metagame. If they don't want to ban it because she's the face of the starter deck and they don't want to ban the starter deck cards, then like put her to win. But in general, I do not want to play against this deck. I'd like... And I understand, like, if you do that, then, like, you also want to check Wind, and I think that's great. Please check Wind as well. Please knock Wind down a couple pegs. I am begging you, as someone that loves playing Wind decks. Make Wind not feel like an auto-win after 5 turns. But this deck is not fun to play with or against, and the, like, sheer tax on deck building and the amount of bad cards I have tried to run to answer this deck should tell you a lot about how much you have to prepare for this deck or lose to it. So that's all I got for y'all. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys found this video informative or helpful in any way while you're deck building for your Materia Cup, give me a like, shoot me a subscribe, tell me in the comments, you know, do all that good stuff so that like YouTube likes me more. Yeah, thanks for watching, y'all.